Desmond O'Hagan returns to us once again for our Zoom presentation. As you know, he was here in January. We are honored to have him as our judge for the national show and as our workshop artist in August. His achievements are so many that I am just going to list only two. That he is the master pastelist for the Pastel Society of America and eminent pastelist for IAPS. Desmond's theory about working with light is really apparent in all of his works, and that's what makes his work so unique. And this is something that he likes to bring to those of us who would want to take his workshop as well. I have a bug flying around here. Desmond will broach today the subject of motivation. We are really fortunate to have him with us once again. There's a bug. So I give to you Desmond O'Hagan, and thank you, Desmond, for being with us today.
Oh, you're welcome. Well, thank you for inviting me. In any case, thank you very much for inviting me back. I enjoyed back in January. Now this seems like it's a long time since January. These last few years have been been interesting. So, which leads me into my presentation today, the concept of motivation. It's a huge part of this career or endeavor. Of course, mine is going to be anecdotal. It's really based around what motivates me. I have been able to observe other people and other artists and see what motivates them, but I'm going to concentrate a lot on what actually motivates me. I have a vast interest in a variety of subjects. I think I have a short attention span in some ways, so I have to be constantly stimulated by new images and new ideas. I'll work on themes and then I'll go back and change and work on another type of a theme, but I have to be constantly charged. And that's very self-motivating. We all are in a position where we don't have a boss, which is a really good thing in some ways. But, you get up in the morning and you think, well, I'm going to paint. You can find a million reasons maybe why you won't paint that morning. Things get in the way. So you have to kind of stay on top of that. I was fortunate to actually have some experience working in the advertising community. And one of the advantages of that was it gave me an insight in the value of creativity, because we were actually having to mark our time by every 15 minutes. What were you going to be working on? What projects you're going to work on? So I took a little of that into fine art, whereas I need to be able to apply myself every day and really produce. And that's a big part, but you do go through lulls and you go through periods where it just doesn't seem to stimulate. So you have to be, it's a big part. You have to be constantly stimulating yourself in this path, I guess the best way to describe it. So I'm gonna share a screen, and before I do that though, I'll explain that I work in pastels and oils. I about 50-50. And I found that also is very motivating, because what it does is if I tend to start getting a little bored with what I'm doing, I'll switch over to another medium, and I find that helps stimulate the other medium, because it just keeps your brain lubricated, keeps everything moving around. And that's a big part, because this is a marathon, it's not a sprint. You really have to kind of pace yourself. I have seen artists in the past that just work like crazy and burn themselves out, and I never hear from them again, or they've gone into something else. So work at your own pace, and that's something that I stress in the workshops. It's like we're not in any kind of competition. We're just working our own pace, and we're trying to achieve better paintings. So that's a big part of my teaching when it comes to the workshops is, and I work individually with each person. And when my goal is not necessarily to have you paint like me, I just want to take what you have and kind of bump it up a little bit. I think that, let me share this screen here. Feel free to ask any questions, just mute yourself. And I always like to create sort of a very casual atmosphere for these type of presentations. So I'm going to show you the presentation now. It's going to include paintings of pastels and oils and some concepts, ideas of what has motivated me. I work primarily from photos, because a lot of the scenes that I'm working on are very fleeting. It's just very difficult to actually set up and paint traffic and cars and people walking and interiors. That's a little bit difficult. I do love to do plein air painting, but I tend to lean a little more towards scenes that are very fleeting, where the light's only available for a very short time. By the time you get the easel all set up, the scene is gone. So I'll take a ton of pictures but I have enjoyed plein air painting. There's beautiful places to paint up here as well as in New Mexico. So I think it's an important part about plein air painting is the fact that you get to see real color, because the photograph only gives you really a little bit of information and it, like structure, a little bit of color, some contrast. And it's also very important what you leave out of the photograph as opposed to what you put into the photograph. So you have to kind of treat it for what it is. It is not the end all when it comes to painting. I tend to experiment a great deal on my paintings, and I tend to abandon the photograph probably about halfway through because I'm just moving off into a different direction. So it's for some information is basically what it's about. Okay, so let's start. Okay, now can you see this image?
Yes.
Okay, so I'm going to start off. Okay, and I will see here. All right. So one artist motivation, and that would be me. These are just a couple quick shots of within my studio. This is my oil palette, and I'm working off of a Jack Richardson set, it's Cabaret. The environment you work on is also important to your motivation. Make it your own. I mean, this is the big part about your studios. We have history of hundreds of years of what artist studios are like. I've always been fascinated by that because you really, I mean, they are their caves. This is the place you go. You sit and read books and paint, most importantly. This is my one of my portable easels, and you can tell that my pastels are incredibly consistent and arranged very beautifully. So I'm just joking about that. One time during a workshop, somebody said, "Well, how do you know where the colors are?" And I said, "Well, they're all numbered." So. Not quite. Okay. Motivation. This is a photograph of Thomas Aiken's studio, where they were doing sculpture, and they brought some farm animals into the studio. I'd like to say that my wife is adamantly opposed to any of this type of stuff in my studio since it's connected to my house. Though we do have the dog, and the cat runs through this occasionally. This I find just fascinating that they actually bring the animals in, but hey, whatever works for you. Then of course there's the artist's love of dance. I don't think this is Degas, but once again, this is an example of really stretching. I know this is some kind of a comedy thing for a movie, but I thought this was a great shot it must have been in the 1920s. And I suppose you have to risk certain things for your artistic integrity there. So they're all standing up ready to fall off that edge there. I work a lot with flats and brights when it comes to oil painting. This easel I've had since 1986, as my father actually built this easel. Well, I lived in Albuquerque for 10 years, from 1970 to 1980. And my dad retired from Kirtland Air Force Base, and then went back to school and ended up working at Sandia Labs. So he had a very scientific mind, and he went and looked at a few easels and built this easel. So this has been with me since 1986. And you can tell it's very, very well used. It's very solid too. One request when he was asking me what kind of easel, I said it has to withstand a lot of pounding. I'm not into the rickety easels. This one's very, very solid because I have a very aggressive approach to painting. So it's one of those things that was really important for this easel to be solid.
Desmond, your father an artist at all too?
Sorry? Say again?
Was your father an artist at all, or just?
No, he was a writer, actually. I mean, his second career was in science. His degrees were in math and electronics, but he was a very, very good writer. So he was a very creative person, and he did do some watercolors. He had taken, I think he had got some books on watercolors, but he was the type of fellow that would just read about stuff and then go do it. So this was an example when he built the easel, he just basically came up with these ideas and looked at a few easels. So this has been so valuable for me for decades. And this is my studio, actually, where I am broadcasting from. This is quite a bit cleaned up compared to what I'm in right now. It's a little more disheveled at this point. But this was for a show that was on the ocean. And it was from scenes I'd taken out in La Jolla, California. Just absolutely loved water, movement. And these were moving in more into a little more abstract expressionist strokes. So these are big paintings. I mean, these are 36 by 36. And then there were some smaller ones that are pastels. But I just love, and this shows you an example of variety in my subject matter. I'm probably more known for urban scenes and interiors, but which I absolutely love to do. But it's important to stretch. Try some different things. Try broadening your repertoire. One of the things I have noticed is that you can be pigeonholed very quickly in this business, especially if things are selling well in a certain subject matter. You need to kind of stretch it out so you don't bore yourself. You don't want it to become repetitive. You don't want it to become routine. And this is a way to stretch. You'll be amazed at how this helps you improve some of the other series or subjects that you like to paint. This is because my approach to painting is very much shapes and edges. So it doesn't really matter what I'm painting. It's just really shapes and edges. And that's what I'm playing with continuously. Another good idea to show you a cleaned up studio. We built a studio in 1996 and added on to our home. So I have a very short commute. And our daughter was just about almost born at this point. We were racing to get the studio done before she was born. And because I knew once she was born, I was not going to be doing any big, heavy construction for quite some time. And so we had to get this done. And my dad actually came up and he helped me build this studio. So it's about 600 square feet, vaulted ceilings. And it's a great cave for me. I do shows in here. I do workshops in here. And when my kids were young, we would put up big sheets and project movies, and they would have sleepovers in the studio. So it was a multi-use space for me. But from a motivational standpoint, it's a great feeling to be able to walk into a really comfortable studio and to create. So I think it's important to have a good space, and for years I painted in an extra bedroom. And it didn't matter, but you had to make it your space. We'll talk about basically three subjects that I find highly motivating. One, I return to Paris every so often. I absolutely love it for architecture. I was an architecture major at UNM before I decided I didn't want to be an architect. And then I came up to Denver, Colorado, and studied graphic design and went into advertising and design. But structure still plays a huge part in what I paint. And way back, my wife, when I was first starting out, my wife was in the hotel industry, and so we would travel a great deal. And this was before kids. And since she was in the hotel business, we got to stay free in some of these international hotels. She worked for the Warwick Hotel, which had other hotels across Europe and in China. It's what do you call Hong Kong, before they went back to China. And so I got very used to free hotel rooms.
Yeah.
And of course that changed when she left the hotel business and went into a different business. So then I had to start paying for hotels. So I wasn't so concerned about the luxury hotels, which we were staying in before, but I was in the center of everything. We stayed in Paris many, many times. And I'm actually heading back in 2 weeks to Paris to teach a workshop in the south of France, but we'll start in Paris. I'm bringing my 21-year-old son with me, so it'll be a great trip. So let's talk a little bit about motivations when it comes to what I like. Much of it was night scenes that I did a show on Paris, wandering around with a camera, looking for that unusual light, that light that just grabs you. And this is a city where there seems to be a painting every corner. So I take these kind of images, which are not professional, pretty grainy actually, and then come up with these paintings. This is an oil, 36 by 48, working with brush, palette knife, really scraping color, but really looking for that energy and charge of the city. This is a pastel of two women walking along a bridge in Paris. Because you can be motivated by a variety of scenes. And when I talk about just shapes and edges, this is a good example of that. It doesn't matter what the subject matter is, as long as you're getting the shapes and edges correct. And you're looking for atmosphere and depth in your painting. These type of scenes motivate me. Look at all of the light and the contrast and just that energy of the city. That's what's really motivating for me. This was near where our hotel was. It's a rather big painting, 30 by 40.
Pastel?
This one is an oil.
Oh.
But you'll notice that my technique in oils and pastels are pretty much identical. It is just shapes and edges and a way of portraying light, whether it's, natural light, sunlight, reflected light, artificial light, all of that comes out in these type of paintings. And that's what charges me, because you're walking along, you see these images and you go, this would make a great painting. Of course, I say that a lot when I'm over there.
Mm-hmm.
This is an oil of a river, the Seine at night. And architecture plays a part, but I'm not looking for architecturally perfect images, because I think that would be a little bit boring. This is another good example. These are the photographs that I'm kind of working from, but I take those and run with them. Changing color, changing angles, really emphasizing the light. Doesn't look like much really, but it has the bones, as they say. And that's what I'm working from. And then experimenting. Experimenting is probably one of the most motivating thing you can do when you're painting, because it just opens your eyes and it gets you out of a routine. It forces you into different directions. Sometimes it won't be successful, but many times you'll come across something and you'll just go, wow, that really worked. If I hadn't tried it, I wouldn't have known. This is a pastel, a night scene. what really sort of jarred me about this scene is that you have all these different lights, all these different contrasts, and then you have these nice shadowy areas. If you see my cursor, you can see like right here, I had no reason to really emphasize the details on this side of the car because it's all in shadow. I'm painting very much how I see, not necessarily what the photograph gives me. So I wanted to create a painting that you feel like you're actually on location and you're seeing this scene with your own eyes. So I'm painting very much how I see, not what the photograph gives me. They're not easy scenes. You got to make sure your perspective is right. You got to make sure your proportions are right, but it is mostly shapes and edges. There's a pastel outdoor scene, classic Parisian cafe. You always have to do a cafe. I mean, it's just all these people, and they're all talking about revolution and whatever. But it's just the smoking and all. It's just you just know you're there. I just love those scenes, and I love figures in scenes, but I don't want to be painting little mini portraits. So I'm going to show you a quick step by step. Working on UArt 600, which is not necessarily that heavily sanded. And this is just along the street next to the river, people walking, going in with darks, deep blues, burnt umber, deep green, gray, I think in there. But a very abstract approach, starting off. Refining, moving into your midtones. Bringing in some warm colors. And the last one is basically the icing in the cake, which is your headlights, adjusting some of the color in the road, on finishing it up. But as they say, the bones are there. The foundation is there for the painting. So I brought in some cooler colors for the road, emphasized some of the warm tones, but this gives you the feeling of movement, action, light, color. I'll go back really quickly. This is an oil.
Would you say that the pastels that you're layering, are you consciously working or subconsciously working from hard to soft?
Not really. Most of all of these recent pastels that I've done, I've been with the Jack Richardson set that I created, which was the Desmond O'Hagan Essential Pastels. It's only 40 pastels. And I've designed it that you can paint everything with 40 pastels and most of the time less. So my approach to pastels is very much an oil painter's approach to pastels. I'm sort of blending colors or layering colors, but I'm not using a ton of pastels. So I'm limiting my pastel setup, and which has been a great advantage for traveling on location. So I don't have a ton of pastels. And I've found that since when I work in oils, I only have 8 colors plus titanium white. So I have limited my pastels down to about 40 pastels. And these are the ones I need. Occasionally I'll add a couple, here and there, but I don't need hundreds and hundreds of pastels. And so that approach has given me a more of an oil painter's approach to pastels. I mean, this is painting with pastels. It's not drawing with pastels. So what I'm trying to avoid is using a ton of different colors, which create a bunch of little paintings within a big painting. This is really giving you a painting that holds together because it's consistent with using just overlapping colors, creating new colors, but not a bunch of random colors all the way throughout. Another night scene. This is one is in oil. very much shapes, abstract shapes, slowly refining those shapes, the exact same thing I do in pastels. But this is what's motivating me. All these edges, color, light, all of that. And it's challenging. One of the keys of motivation is being challenged. This is a pastel on one of the bridges. Very, very fleeting scene. This light was there for just a few minutes, and then it was gone. So my goal in this painting was be able to show movement, show figures, but I was going to leave the figures obscure because they are moving and it's dark. Where you see more definition is in the lights, because that's where the greatest amount of contrast is. And really experimenting with color in this situation. The actual photograph is just blobs of blacks and whites. You don't get very good color from shooting unless you do some kind of a professional setup. So I just wanted to know where the structure was and then really experimented with the light. But I really enjoy this type of atmosphere. I'm not much of a morning person, but I really feel myself thriving as it gets later in the evening. So you probably won't see any morning paintings in this group. This was from a demo I did on Zoom. This is in Paris, kind of a typical street scene, but I moved things around. I wanted to bring the car on the right in a little bit and then kind of simplify the buildings in the background. It's not important for me to paint every single window, door. This is part of the experimenting process and trying to simplify. And I came up with this. Very, very abstract, but it gets the point across. You have movement, lights, reflection, guy on a bicycle, lady with an umbrella on the left. This is part of simplifying the shapes. And I find when it comes to the motivation in the painting like this, my motivation is to simplify it and try and express exactly what I felt when I first saw the scene. The photograph's just a reminder.
Are you ready? Okay.
Hello? Did someone have a question? No? Okay. So and this is painted on a burgundy paper, or a Canson paper, actually. This is a scene in Denver. I think it's a Qdoba Mexican restaurant. But what motivated me in this scene was just the shapes. Look at these great big dark shapes in here. I mean, this is just a natural for structure and the dark shadows in the background. And you can tell it's kind of a wintry scene. You got the snow on the ground. But I just love that. And of course, you got the guy in the window. The people actually who purchased this painting, they really kept going back to Edward Hopper. They felt this was very Edward Hopperish. And I would agree with them. I think that but the motivation for this was the shapes. And that's how the painting looks. So really pushing color, working with a palette knife, big brushes, and just creating that atmosphere, recreating the atmosphere that I felt when I was there. It's a fairly good sized painting. It's about 24 by 36. This is a pastel of an interior of a hotel in Denver called the Oxford Hotel. It's a very old hotel, but they had this, sort of beautiful flower arrangement on this coffee table. But my goal wasn't to paint everything as accurately as possible. I wanted to infuse as much atmosphere and depth in the painting, give some distance. You have the guy back here at the desk, but the focus is this flower arrangement. As I walked into this hotel, I could I could imagine what this painting could be like. And this is a small one. This is about 9 by 12. But really pushing the color, making the mark, move on. So when it comes to motivation, this is what I'm trying to achieve. and trying to constantly keep myself interested. This is our light rail system in Denver. This is a big painting, 36 by 48. Not your normal subject matter, but I love structure. And I thought this was really interesting to be able to show that complexity without painting every little line, every little, part of the track. So it was kind of an interesting experiment to kind of play with this, and also the sun's, reflected sun setting. Big shapes. Downtown in Denver, have this little chunk of light on a building that's kind of bouncing out behind all these areas that are all basically in shadow. Sort of get sunlight over on this side. Highly motivating. On one of our morning walks, we have a golden retriever who has to be walked a lot. The golden retriever is a hunting dog, so they are active. So I'm passing this scene, and what motivated me about this scene, first of all, it's a little bit of a dismal scene. It's kind of a little bit industrial. It's just, we have this little river going through part of the neighborhood, and it's all just concrete bridge, built many, many, many years ago. But what motivated me on this scene was the difference between the snow and shadow and the snow and light. And I was looking at that as I was moving along, and I thought, this could make an interesting painting. So here's what I came up with. And this is pushing color to basically as far as I can. Because when you look at how dismal the scene is, I mean, there are nice houses around here and everything, but it's not really a scene that would jump right off your on your radar right away. But I'm looking for something that's the contrast, the colors, and really pushing the colors. And this one gives that life. You have these subtle purple blues, purple greens in here. And then you got this really light where the sun's really hitting. Now, none of this is white. The lightest color here is a light blue, light pinks, light yellows. I don't use white in my pastels because you've already, when you're reaching for a white pastel, you've already gone beyond your color spectrum because there's no color in white. And every pastel that you touch should have some color in it. So keep that in mind when you're painting. I always remember I got some great advice years and years and years ago by this artist. And he says, the only time you want to use a white pastel is when you sign your name, which I thought was kind of fun. But also keep in mind, you don't want to use pastels that are so light that look like white. So like I said, there's a combination of light blue and light pink in there. And the subtlety, this is a digital slide, so it may not show some of those subtle differences in color. But I love snow and shadow. You really can play with some greens and purples in there. This is a house that I used to pass quite a bit when my son was in high school, and we would drive by this house. A little bit ramshackly, but great bones, great structure. And this is a big painting, 36 by 48. But a lot of this is focusing on the structure of the house, and everything else is secondary in support. So big shapes around it. Believe it or not, this is a potential painting. When you think about it, it's very backlit, very dark, but I have the structure that I want in this picture. We were walking to this restaurant. That's my wife in front. And I thought, ooh, this might make an interesting painting. This is how I was getting motivated. This was something I was like, this would be interesting. So this is what I came up with. Really playing with the shadows, the darks, purples, greens, blue grays, all of that. And then this sort of mosaic pattern, excuse me, on the sidewalk where all that reflected light's hitting this damp sidewalk. And I think that's one of the last of the Winchell donuts back there, which I thought was interesting. You'll be surprised where you will find your paintings at. But very fun. Late at night, going down one of the main streets in Denver called Broadway. Excuse me. Light, reflected light, all of that, moving cars. And this is what I came up with. Really pushing the edges, blending, letting those colors drift over in other areas. This is the exciting part for me, is to get in there and really start to kind of, in some ways, bend the rules a bit. Interior, love that light coming in the window. This is a restaurant I used to go play chess with a friend every so often, and it was really funny because we'd be playing, and then I just stand up, pull out my iPhone, or I had a little camera, and just take a bunch of shots and sit back down. Nobody cared, but it was great because I got some really interesting non-posed interiors. One of the old movie theaters here in town. Playing with color, really trying to get as much as I can out of it. And you can tell the photographs are kind of, I don't know, they're very boring in some ways, especially when it comes to color. Your goal is to try and push as much as you can out of it. If you're just going to recreate the photograph, then, well, it seemed, for me, it's kind of pointless, because, you know, you have the photograph already. What you're trying to get is something much, much, much better. It's a pastel of downtown in Denver. You got those street grates where the steam's coming out of. All these shapes, cars, trucks, buses, but done in a more simplified way. But your eye is making up that detail that is only loosely implied. This is a neighborhood scene, rather big painting. I like to paint of my time. So you're going to see street lights, you're going to see cars, you're going to see telephone wires. All of that's there. This is out in front of the Denver Art Museum. We have a very odd looking museum, but it's a little different. It's got an interesting shape. And this is actually the shadow of the shape of the building. But lots to paint. Another little scene of that Broadway street, storefronts, lights. Lots of fun. But this oil is handled very much how I would handle in my pastels. Recreating this scene in pastels would be very, very similar. Another downtown scene. It's a big one, 36 by 48. Really pushing color and shapes. Painting called Three Buses. Leaning more into a little bit of pulling a little from the abstract expressionists. A little neighborhood scene, not my neighborhood, an old neighborhood called Baker Street, or Baker neighborhood. These next four, five images are of a small pastel, but it just shows what's in using the pastel. This is on a Canson paper. So I'm showing edges, shapes, and how the pastel is evolving from basically a very abstract pattern. Excuse me. You can see pressing down hard in some areas and then letting up. So you're getting some texture, you're getting overlapping in color. You're getting more of a visual texture as opposed to a physical texture, because I'm overlapping maybe 2 or 3 colors. I don't put a ton of pastel on the paper for a couple practical reasons. One, when you're shipping it to the galleries or to clients, collectors, you don't want to have basically a very colorful ant farm on the bottom of your mat or on the bottom of your frame. So I do a little bit less is more. I put on that mark and move on. I don't labor it. You can see big, thick strokes in here. Contrast, color. So all of that makes up a painting that looks like this. The first area was right here. Second area was right here. Third area was right here. Only implying detail. Not going in there and working, doing something super detailed. Fourth area was right here. The fifth area was right here. So all of those shapes and abstract patterns make up a representational painting. This is just a quick showing how similar my oils are to my pastels. This is about 24 by 36. It's a street scene in Denver. After sketching it out in a Conte crayon on a linen gessoed surface or gessoed linen surface, I go in with my big brushes, just as similar like the sides of a pastel. Slowly working from dark to light, putting in those big shapes, working on the foreground here of the street, refining as you're going along. That's the final. So it gives you an idea that this could very easily have the same effect as in pastel. It actually, for me, it actually has almost a pastel quality to it. Okay, this was an interesting endeavor for me. In 2018, which is now Peak Media, which originally was, I'm trying to think what the original name was, but they're the ones that do the Pastel Journal, and they do the Artist Magazine, Watercolor. I had done 4 videos for them, sort of demo videos, and they came to me and asked me, they wanted to do something really kind of interesting, and would I be interested in recreating a pastel of one of the masters, being obviously Degas. And I was like, I'm in. This would be really a lot of fun. So we did 4 videos, and they are available on Artist Network. But the first video was me doing some charcoal drawings, very much like Degas, and then really getting inside the head of Degas. And you can tell I don't really paint like Degas. But what I wanted to do was learn about his color, the way he did things, that the way he approached things. So I did quite a bit of studying on it. And he's always been a favorite of mine, and I've seen many shows. So we approached it as doing copying the masters. So it was the name of the series called Decoding Degas. And we were fortunate also at the time that the Denver Art Museum was having a show on Degas. So we were able to go in and actually film inside the museum at the show. And I was able to go around and talk about the paintings. And it was just a lot of fun. My son was about 16 or 17 at the time, and I was telling him about this project. And he said, "You're going to do a forgery of Degas?" And I said, no. I said, this is a copy. I said, it's an age-old technique for students of art to go into museums or go into do whatever, and they create a copy of the painting. And I said, but 6 to 8 months from now, when I sell it, then it's a forgery. Kidding. Anyways, but which I didn't. I still have the painting. So, but it was really fun and very motivating for me to get inside his head. I did several drawings in charcoal, and you can see those on the video. And then I basically recreated his dancer in pastel. And I was really fortunate also that I had a friend who was a painter, and he was a pastelist who passed away a few years earlier. And he had almost a complete set of Sennelier pastels that he gave me. And they were old. And it was like, these are like the pastels that Degas actually used. Not these ones, but the kind of pastels he used. So when I was trying to recreate this pastel, I really was using colors and pastels that would have been available to Degas during his time in France, in Paris. So I'll show you the two paintings kind of side by side now. The first one is Degas, the second one's mine. And you can see where I was really trying to get the color as close as possible. And it was just a great time to do that. We talked a lot about learning about how to portray skin tones. He used a lot of green, sort of chartreuse colors in his skin tone. And I did change the background a little bit. I got to be honest with you, I'm not crazy about this background, but this part up here, I kind of made it a little more blendy. But much of the rest of it was very, very similar. But an interesting task. So the first two videos were sort of drawings, and then one charcoal drawing with some pastel, and the second one was just completing the finished pastel. The third video was a painting of a ballet dancer, but it would have been in my own style, but using what I'd learned color-wise from Degas' paintings. And then the fourth one was a urban scene, Paris. So it was really kind of a nice little four video set.
You really captured it there. Beautiful.
Thank you. Yeah, it was a lot of fun. You know, it's going back and forth, and so I got to tell you, maybe that forgery thing could be something down the road for me.
I could. You would be quite good at it.
Well, the only trouble is, and my wife said, you know, if I did get caught, she's not coming to visit.
You're on your own.
I am definitely on my own, and I better find a pretty tough gang in the prison. And I don't think it's going to be the art gang, you know. So, but anyways, all right. So this is the third subject that I was going to talk about, that I've really been very interested in. Is I lived in Albuquerque for 10 years, spent a lot of time traveling around New Mexico. So I did a show that was just last year, and it was called The Contemporary New Mexico Landscape. And primary goal was take the New Mexico landscape and really push the limits on color, strokes, and basically abstract. I really was wanting to have a more expressive approach to the New Mexico landscape. So this one, very typical in the chimiza plants. I'm not even sure if I'm pronouncing that correctly, but this is where I really want to get those strokes down and really move into it. This was later in the day. This was all around Albuquerque, up near the Sandias. Just absolutely loved being able to experiment with color. And like I said, when you talk about being self-motivated, so I'm working on street scenes, I'm working on urban scenes, interiors. And then I was down in Albuquerque, and I thought, oh, I would love to do a whole show on New Mexico. So it was really a great deal of fun to go out there and just kind of plod along up in the hills and look for color and look for those type of scenes. This is very classic: shapes, edges, rocks, all of that. I mean, this is right up in the foothills. Using those pastels. And this is also with the same set, with that, working with that Jack Richardson set. But I want to get those images down and just move on. Rocks. You can see the tie-in with a more abstract expressionist approach to this.
Desmond, did you paint those on site, or did you do those later?
No, the light on these, this was late in the day. So the light was only going to appear for a very, very few minutes. And also I'm basically on the edges of rocks taking pictures. So I think this is just as the sun was going down. So I'm just getting, it's just a kind of a few glimpses of it. This one was called Pink House. And it's just really pushing the shapes and the colors. Most of this is experimenting back in the studio. This is one of the oils. Really looking for that texture, the grittiness, the volume of shapes. Really enjoyed working on this show. Our classic cactus, but very abstract. This is a sunset scene near Raton, actually. Another sunset scene, just with a row of cactus in front of this kind of really old tree. This is a fairly big size painting. This is 36 by 60. So it's quite big. This is an interesting story on this one. This is the Rio Grande Gorge. And for those of you who have been there, it's pretty flat around there. There's not a lot of places to get up high. And I wanted to get a good perspective of the way the gorge goes back with all the twists and turns as it goes farther back into this is looking north. That bridge, if you've been there, is just a steel bridge. And it's funny when you drive over it, it definitely has an effect to you. But it's 600 feet from the top of that bridge to the water. So how was I going to get the perspective that I wanted? I mean, it was so important for me to get up high because I wanted to get that perspective, which could not be achieved at ground level. So I got a drone and learned how to use it. And my son and I went down to Taos and we got in there about, I wanted to get a sunset and a sunrise. And when we got there at sunset, the wind was so bad that we couldn't get the thing in the air. Next morning we went out. So this is morning and I got the thing up there and it was terrific. I can only go 400 feet in the air because of airspace rules. So that drone was 1,000 feet above the water. And I got the angles, and I originally got the drone because I wanted to get some interesting perspective scenes for urban scenes. But it came in very handy for this. But that was what my motivation was to get up high and to get a really unusual view of the Rio Grande Gorge that couldn't be done on the ground level. But I did realize that if I lost contact with the drone and this thing went into the water, I would be there for a couple of days hiking down trying to find that thing. I have insurance on it, but I have to mail it back if it's all damaged. So it was really interesting. I was kind of pushing the limits and trying to I'm really looking for some interesting images to work from. And so it worked out for me. And this painting is 40 by 60 inches. So it is quite big.
It is just gorgeous.
Well, thank you. And you can tell a lot of it is just really pushing color around, working with shadow, really working with the reflection in the water, obviously structure with the bridge, and very much of it's, I mean, color-wise, this really hits me as that northern New Mexico. Very rugged, very rugged.
Does the drone take a pretty good picture?
Not bad. I mean, it's got a 4K lens, but I mean, the drone actually is about the size of my cell phone. So it's not a big one. It's basically considered kind of a toy. But it was a interesting challenge because I've always liked the gorge, but I wanted to get a really interesting view of it.
It's amazing.
Sorry?
It's amazing.
Oh, well, thank you. Yeah, it was a lot of fun. And and once I get back to the studio, really experimented with the colors.
Mm-hmm.
Along the side of the mountains, again, these are oils. This is in Albuquerque. Just really, this is about a 36 by 48. Shapes, edges, color. This is our backyard. You can find motivation and inspiration just about anywhere. And that's me painting on location up by the foothills or Flatirons near Boulder. So that is the presentation. I'm happy to answer questions. Let me stop sharing. Okay.
Thank you, Desmond. That's great.
You're welcome. Oh, it was a lot. I always enjoy, and that was actually a presentation that I've added to, because especially with the new New Mexico paintings that really were a lot of fun. And I'm still actually working on more of those. But I'm happy to answer questions on really anything.
Desmond, I just wanted to ask you, at the workshop, how will we be working with, let me just put that thing back on the video. Are there some things that were in this presentation that would really be a motivation for people taking the workshop that they should bring with them to work on? Or would you like have challenges, bring your images and then we try and replicate something? Or how do we move to the next thing without trying to make ourselves carbon copies of you? We're not trying to become Desmond O'Hagan or Degas.
Right. Well, first of all, my approach to teaching, as I mentioned, is not to have you paint like me. It's very much what I want to do is take what you're doing and bump it up, bring it up at a level. I mean, this is how you really move through this type of career, is that you want to be constantly improving, in which case I feel that I'm constantly a student. I'm always looking for new approaches and new ways to do things. I always think when you start believing in the master theory, I think you're on the downward slide, because if you don't feel you have anything to learn, it could get very, very boring and monotonous. So I really like the idea of constantly be a student. So with the workshops, I work individually with everyone and work with your strengths and work with what you may feel could be improved. So it's a very individual approach. You're welcome to work on anything you want, especially things that maybe you haven't tried before. This is how you stretch. So my goal is to kind of gently move you out of your comfort zone. I want you to come away from the workshop with new ideas, new ways to approach different subjects, feeling that you have actually stretched, but in a good way. You know, I'm sure as everything, when you're painting, it can be a little frustrating, but I keep it very light for the workshops. But I just want you to gain as much as you can. I'm going to throw a lot of information at you over those 3 days, and then take what you can use, disregard what doesn't work for you. Thinking about shapes and edges, and maybe seeing things a little differently than the way you saw them before, which will then open up your world to painting other kinds of variety of subjects, where you kind of say, oh, I can't do people well, or I don't really like to do, interiors. Well, if it's all just shapes, it doesn't really matter what the actual subject is, right? Because you're going to approach it in that similar way. So like I said, I'll throw a lot of information at you. You'll be working at your own pace. It's definitely not a competition, but I want you to get as much as you can out of it. And then hopefully what I've said over those 3 days will rattle around in your head for weeks and months to come, and you will apply some of those ideas and techniques. Right. I have done, I think I've done a couple workshops for the New Mexico Pastel Society.
Yes, you have.
Over the years.
Yes.
Many years ago, I think I was 13 when I first did my first one.
And we were all 5.
Yeah, and you were all 5 and 6. I remember that. Yes. But I mean, I like to teach. I don't do a lot of workshops. Just a small handful a year, sometimes about 5, because I have, a tremendous amount of work going on. But what I love to do, it just helps me get out of the studio and see what everybody else is doing. And I learn from the workshops as well. I mean, as I'm going through and working with people, I'm very hands-on with the workshop, but if you don't want me to touch your painting, that's totally fine. But it's sometimes easier to show you as opposed to just explain to you. But I'm totally fine either way. But sometimes I'll see stuff that people are working on. I go, oh, I can use that combination of colors. You're constantly storing information when you're painting. And especially in this way of painting where it's more of a painter's view of pastels, you're thinking, overlapping colors, edges, this shape, how do I refine this shape? I mean, there are primary shapes in a painting and secondary shapes. Not everything is of equal importance. Sometimes I find that when I look at paintings and shows where everything is so detailed out, it can be really flattening, because that's not really how you see. That's how the photograph shows you, but it's not really how you see. There's going to be more depth of field. There's going to be some atmosphere there. You want to be able to exploit that in the painting and be able to give you that feeling of being there. And sometimes simplifying is one of the easiest ways of doing it.
I still have things rattling around in my head from one of those earlier workshops. And
oh, did yeah.
And also from other workshops, because I found it takes me quite a while to sort of integrate things and have it work for me. So,
Sure.
If I don't always leave the workshop thinking, oh, I've learned lots and lots of things. It's like, okay, now how am I going to use this later on? It'll come back to me.
Absolutely. And that's a big part of it is, I mean, you want to get as much good information as you can. And that's how you're developing your style. Your sort of your direction is everybody pulls from somebody else. I mean, I think it was, I'm almost sure it was Picasso who says, good artists borrow, great artists steal. And I thought that was just hysterical. So, I mean, take whatever you can. You're all developing your own styles. I mean, it takes years to get where but it's the point. It's not getting to a point where you go, oh, I got it. I mean, my style is changing too. I find even after all these years, I've been painting since 1987 professionally, and it's changed. I had one painting, and this is what I found very motivational. I had a painting, I was painting of New York. I was working on a show of New York, and this was an oil, and the painting was just boring. The scene was interesting, but it was just kind of boring. And I was frustrated with it. And I grabbed a palette knife that I had not used, and it was more of it's not even really a palette knife, but it was kind of a little bigger tool. And I started moving paint around, and things threw me in a completely different direction. And I've been painting in oils like that ever since. And that was just the odd chance out that this painting was failing, and I didn't care if I messed it up. And that's where you make that jump. You experiment with a bit of risk. And let's face it, we're not saving lives here. If the painting had died, nobody got hurt. I would have had a short ceremony. There would have been tears, but I would have moved on. But it was just being able to take that jump and push it to the point where, not being haphazard, but stretching. And that's a big part of painting is stretching. I mean, we've all seen art out there that's competent, but pretty repetitive. So it doesn't have a lot of inspiration to it. I mean, you want to have a sense of soul in your paintings. You don't want to look like it's just been, drummed out, the same painting, And so that's one of the things that I try and push is to develop your uniqueness in your paintings. And that's what sets you apart. When you're in a show, you look at all the paintings in a show, you're going to see a painting, several paintings that are just going to jump right off the wall. And what makes them different than the other paintings is because they're unique. And that's what every artist is trying to achieve, is uniqueness. I remember talking about with painters in the galleries, and I said, I would like people to come into the gallery and say, I want to see the newest O'Hagan, as opposed to the newest landscape by O'Hagan or the newest street scene, because I want them to be able to expand on that and I don't want to feel like I'm pigeonholed. So I've always done a variety. Like you can see right here, this is one of the oils from the ocean scenes, completely different from a street scene, but so much fun to paint. I mean, you just kind of let loose with the big brushes, palette knives and everything. And then I've got pastels in the back here that are fully abstract expressionist, where I'm actually going in with no source of reference. And then the images are appearing just from constantly working and turning things around. And I found that very freeing and helped me a lot in working with my oils and my pastels. So these are those experimenting techniques that I plan to bring to workshops.
Desmond,
Do you use, how much pre-work do you do? Like, do you do notons? Do you do compositional drawings first to come up with your final painting?
I used to do a little bit of that in the beginning. Mostly I'm doing that in my head as I'm actually composing the paintings. So there is an exercise that I do in the second day of the workshop, which is kind of like a notan, but really what it is emphasizing the shapes and values of a painting. So like the first exercise in that, the first part of that exercise is you basically do a small black and white of the painting you're going to work on. And what it does is what you're doing is just creating what the main shapes are. And it's just going to be black and white. And you're working on white paper, so you'd just be working with a black marker. The second one, another small one, and these are like 5x7, is black, white, and gray. And what I'm doing is I'm breaking down the painting into basically 3 values: darks, mediums, and lights. And then when I'm working with my pastels and that certain section of the painting, that's the only pastels I'm playing with. I'm working with my dark pastels. Then I'm working with my medium pastels and then my lights. Now imagine you're going to experiment a little bit in there, but it's a great way to keep the truck on the road. You know, because I know all of us have been in painting where you're driving, and I always kind of describe painting as kind of driving a truck with a very loose steering wheel. You know, you're painting and it starts to drift to the left and you start to bring it over to the right, then it goes back, but you want to try and keep it in the center. Some of these techniques are helping you keep your painting on track, sort of self-critiquing as you're going along.
Desmond, I have a quick question. You on the screen, your darks to me look black, and I know you don't use black. Talk to us about how you get nice deep darks.
Okay. When I first started working with pastels, we didn't have many dark colors. This would have been in the mid 80s. There weren't a lot. I worked with Rembrandt and then some Sennelier. So I did use a little bit of black, but I never used it in its pure form. I always overlapped it with something else. Once again, it was that whole concept of overlapping colors. So I never left it black. I remember getting some great advice years ago also. It says, never paint your darks so dark that you can't see a black circle in it, because everything must have some color. So when I would work way back then, I would use a black pastel and then immediately come over it with, you know, a lighter color just to give it a deep color, but it would still have color in it. Nowadays, you have so many different darks out there. I know there's Terry Ludwig has like an eggplant. You have some deep greens, deep blues. All the ones that you saw in my presentation, all were using deep greens, deep purples, deep reddish browns, and a combination of warm and cool colors. So what your eye is doing is your eye is seeing those contrasts, darks, mediums, and lights. And that's what makes the painting just jump off the page, because that's what your eye is attracted to is some really interesting contrast. I mean, if the whole painting was just one value, like a medium value, regardless of how much color you're putting into it, it would be kind of boring. Does that kind of answer your question?
Yes,
Yeah.
thank you very much.
Sure.
Desmond, I have a question.
Yeah.
When you're going to do a pastel, what influences your decision on whether you use sanded paper or a smoother surface like Canson?
I missed the last part of that. Say that again.
What influences your decision in doing a pastel, whether you decide to use a sanded paper or a smoother surface like Canson?
Not really. The kind of paper doesn't play as big a part. I tend to spend more time on what size I'm going to do. I've painted on basically, I would say, all papers at this point, especially after doing so many workshops and working with people. And so I've leaned very much towards less textured paper. So UART 600 is kind of a light texture to it. It's a nice grain, but I don't like to lean towards heavily textured because they tend to chew up the pastels. And it's harder to get some harder edges with that. And also for shipping, you've got a lot of pastel on there. Canson, and it is the smooth side, it's not the dimpled side. Can't stand the dimpled side. But Canson, over the years, it helped me to put my marks down and move on. So I'm not doing a lot of blending, a lot of really overworking the pastel. I've described painting also as a little bit like listening to music. You have music, you have a song that has slow parts and fast parts, but the song doesn't stop until the end. And with pastels and with painting in general, you want to have a nice flow of your painting. But when you start overworking, that's when the music stops. And then that's what the viewer's eye sees. They'll go to the areas where it becomes very overworked. So I like the fact that less texture restricts me from overworking something, because then you start to lose tooth very quickly. But size plays more of a point as opposed to just the type of paper.
Thank you.
Sure. Any other questions?
Not. Well, thank you so much, Desmond. That was just wonderful.
Great. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm amazed at how much your pastels look like your oils and vice versa.
Yeah. It's a lot of fun. I mean, I've had a great time. This is something that I keep looking at. Is so much more to learn. And what more could I ask for?